When the pioneers came west, they didn't fight over land. What they fought over was the water. And the water today is what is so extremely valuable still.
Of all the water on this earth, only 3% is fresh.
It's time that the people realize that the water is more precious than gold. And you can't function without water, and you've got to conserve it.
All the water we will ever have on Earth is here right now, locked in a cycle of precipitation and evaporation. Once in a while, we have way too much. More often, we don't have enough.
Water's going to be a fight. I mean, there's no question. Water's going to be a fight. In fact, whether we lose the water because of overpumping or not, we're probably going to lose it to population some way or another.
We have dammed, diverted, drained, and dirtied our fresh water supplies to the point of emergency. It is no longer wise to drink untreated surface water anywhere in the lower 48 states.
When the companies dropped their load of toxic chemicals, it was like, well, dilution is the solution to the problem. So a majority of these sites are by the water.
I just can't believe we're going to let this thing die. And the crisis is greater now than it's ever been, and it's not that hard to fix.
We thought water was ours for the taking. We were wrong. Most of our rivers rise in the mountains. High peaks stop passing clouds, forcing them to pay a toll of moisture. In autumn and winter, the snowpack grows. All spring and into summer, the snows melt, feeding mountain streams and lakes, forming rivers. As volume grows and the water drops in elevation, its force increases. Water becomes power. The mightiest river in the western U.S. is the Columbia. Its power has been its undoing. The Columbia River surges out of the Canadian Rockies into the United States, where it carves an erratic path through rock, desert, and rainforest to finally empty into the Pacific Ocean. It has done so for 6 million years. Kent and Irene Martin make their living as commercial fishers on the lower Columbia. Kent's great-grandfathers came here from Norway and Sweden. They too gill-netted salmon on this stretch of river.
Well, if you were son of a fisherman or had a close relative that was a fisherman, sometimes you were in the boat by the time you were 7, 8 years old, just on an occasional basis, and on a regular basis by the time you were 12. It was important. It was passing on their life's work.
Coming out beautifully, just absolutely beautifully.
People have been sustained by the Columbia River for thousands of years. Its waters revered for their bounty. Native Americans use salmon as currency in a thriving regional trade. Traditional Indian fishers on wooden scaffolds pluck migrating salmon from the river with dip nets. White settlers who flocked to the lower Columbia in the late 19th century turned the salmon harvest into a commercial bonanza. Busy canneries lined the river. The economy of the region revolved around the Columbia's abundant and renewable resource. Today, the river's legendary salmon runs are history, causing the Columbia snake system to be ranked among the nation's most endangered waterways. What used to be a 1,200-mile freeway for migrating fish has had dam after dam placed like roadblocks across its path. River flows and levels are managed in the front office. The fishing economy is in shambles. Historic runs of wild salmon numbering 10 to 16 million are down to around 300,000. Hatchery fish augment that number but introduce new problems to the embattled wild salmon. Kent and Irene's livelihood hangs in the balance.
It's a little Chinook, little 2-year-old probably. I have everything to lose: my culture, my heritage, my livelihood, my identity as a person. I'm a fisherman. It's all I've ever wanted to be. It's my life. For people in the Northwest, salmon has come to symbolize a kind of canary in the coal mine. I think it has a deeper symbolism that our environment and our whole surroundings here are pretty sick, and we better do something about it.
On the main stem of the Columbia and Snake Rivers, there are more than 20 major dams. If you include the tributaries, 100 more. Most major dams are called cash registers. They produce power. Lots of power. So much power that Northwest residents enjoy the cheapest electricity rates in the nation. And there's power to spare. The surplus is marked up and sold to states farther south. The hydroelectric dams have brought the region jobs, population, and prosperity. The mighty Columbia has gone the way of all our great waterways. It has been developed, transformed from a river to a workhorse. So destructive have the dams been to the riverine ecosystem that Congress attempted in 1980 to break the power industry's stranglehold. Federal legislation mandated that salmon be given co-equal status with hydropower. The Army Corps of Engineers went to work. They have spent millions creating bypass systems to get salmon around the dams. The cornerstone of their program is fish transportation. Juvenile salmon attempting to migrate downstream are sucked from the river and barged through the remaining gauntlet of dams. Critics say barging is no solution. Some even call it a deadly gimmick. The program is defended by its director, Corps biologist John McKern.
I think barging does work. I think over the years what we've seen is we get about 2.5 times as many fish back by barging than we would if the fish were allowed to migrate in river. We're using an artificial solution to solve a problem that's an artificial problem.
A small sample of juveniles is intercepted, anesthetized, and examined on their way to the barge. Opponents of this artificial solution want the river operated more like a river. When young salmon need to get downstream, speed up the flow and let the fish swim out on their own.
The only parts of the scientific community that I know of that supports barging are the hired stooges for the power utility people. but it's being trotted out continuously by the utilities because it's cheaper. And it leaves the whole system in place to continue generating power. And after all, that's the real point of the system. I mean, to hell with salmon. You know, let's do as little as we possibly can to comply with what the strictures that society is placing on us, but let's not miss a kilowatt.
The Corps of Engineers built these structures at the request of Congress for the benefit of the public, and we operate them for the benefit of the public. If Congress authorizes us to build or change projects, we'll do that, but it's got to be the public that wants it.
Whether or not one approves of the dam-building mania that found such happy expression on this river system, no one's about to give up electricity. Ironically, even the bitterest of opponents on this issue believe salmon and hydropower can coexist, should coexist, as losing the salmon would be far more costly than finding a way to restore them. But nobody wants to make the sacrifices or foot the bill.
I think the Columbia River stands as a beautiful example as to what happens when you make some very conscious trades of the environment for progress. Power isn't free. The irrigated vegetables and all the goodies that are provided by the development of the Columbia Basin have come at a cost. And all of a sudden now society is waking up to the fact that that cost is astronomical.
Kent and Irene have made the most painful decision of their lives, to move to British Columbia, where the rivers still teem with salmon. Although the Martins must move on, they remain bound up in the fate of the Columbia River.
I think all of us will lose it if we lose this resource. I think we have to make some rational decisions about what can be saved and what can't be saved. But at the same time, I think it's critical to hang on to something that is as miraculous as the salmon fishery.
They have been called the late Great Lakes. Holding nearly 1/5 of the world's surface fresh water, the lakes were an industrial mecca for a century. Though many plants continue to produce, the heyday is over now. A legacy of environmental abuse lives on. The hidden pernicious problem is toxic chemicals dumped in and near the water. The water looks cleaner than it has for decades. It is not. Sediments are contaminated and growing more so as landfills leach daily into the Great Lakes watershed. 43 toxic hotspots have been identified by the Canadian and U.S. governments. 2 of the worst are the Buffalo River and its better-known neighbor, the Niagara River. Its falls are North America's most famous water attraction. Just upriver is a less romantic landmark, a manufacturing corridor known locally as Chemical Alley. The plants that encrust these shores may legally discharge toxic chemicals into the water, but within limits. The rest must be disposed of in other ways. Toxic dumps litter the landscape. PCBs, dioxin, Mirex, the poisonous waste of a century. Landfills up to a mile from the river sit atop fractured bedrock, allowing chemicals to leach into underground streams. These follow gravity, emerging on the cliff face of the Niagara Gorge and cascading toward the river. Other toxic dumps sit directly on the river, making it even easier for contaminants to escape. At least these sites are fenced and posted. 15 years ago, they were a deep, dark secret. 15 years ago, the region's toxic bequest was laid bare by a group of blue-collar families who neither intended nor desired to become front-page news. They were the families of Love Canal and they forced the nation to acknowledge the contaminated skeleton in its own closet. Joanne Hale was among them.
When my husband and I first were looking for homes, we had to find something affordable because he was the only one working. We had been married only 2 years. I already had a small baby at the time, and it was low crime, not inner city. It looked like an area where a middle-class family would want to live.
The Hales moved to the neighborhood with their infant daughter in 1976. 2 years later, a pregnant Joanne found out they were living beside 22,000 tons of toxic chemicals.
The children would play, they would, eat the berries off the ground, the wild strawberries, and we never stopped and we encouraged them. We slowly fed our children the dioxin that was planted there because we grew our own gardens here.
Because Joanne was pregnant, the Hales were among the first families to be moved out. A month and a half later, Joanne gave birth to her second daughter.
She was born with a tumor that had to be removed at 3 days old. My husband and I, we both have had bone tumors removed. My oldest daughter has arthritis. I've had a hysterectomy. I can never have children again. I can go up and down some of these streets and point to probably 9 houses out of 15 where there's been a cancer death in that home.
Authorities say the toxic wastes are under control, not leaching into the river. But Love Canal activists disagree. After a rain, Joanne can detect a familiar and frightening chemical odor coming from the storm sewers. Joanne has been working for change at the grassroots level ever since her life was turned upside down. Like many victims of the tragedy at Love Canal, activism replaced anger. Purpose replaced fear.
Instead of being at home and acting like Betty Crocker, I now go out 3-4 times a week to different communities. I'm also a legal assistant at an environmental law firm. And I guess Love Canal happened for a reason, and that is the reason for me, is so that I can go out and help other people in communities similar to Love Canal.
Love Canal was the catalyst for a level of regional blue-collar activism unmatched anywhere in the country.
How many of you have eaten fish from Lake Erie? I have too. I thought it was great. I loved it. But where does the water come from? Buffalo River. And what's the matter with the Buffalo River? It's polluted. So we've got to do something to change that. And the only people that can take care of anything around us is... That's absolutely right. You're the ones that have to do the work. I'm going to give everybody a pair of gloves. They're going to fit everybody. Put them on. You've got to keep them on all the time that you're working in the water. If they get a hold
These are the self-named Buffalo River Rats of School 33. For 2 years, they've been studying their local waterway, working to improve its sorry lot. Their mentor is 6th grade teacher Margaret Heaney.
This is your river. We'd like to get it back sometime to the point where you're not having to be afraid to swim in it or afraid to eat fish out of it.
The river rats are looking for life forms in the polluted river, hoping they'll find signs of an improving ecosystem.
I caught a fish!
Come on over. There might be something in here. I'm going to get the glass jar and get some water so we can start dumping into the bucket.
You'll see. Oh, look at this. Can you smell the oil coming up? Yeah. Chris, right here, Rosini, look at these.
Those are fish eggs there.
Fish eggs?
Yeah.
Oh,
Those
can we
are
keep
fish
them?
eggs.
Yo,
Can we keep them, Miss Heaney?
I think so. You feel like you're a real small piece of making this better, but you're not. You're a real big piece of it. And if we do work on it, we're going to save this river.
These kids are active on river issues after school hours as well.
Yes.
Oh, look at it.
Here they help to discourage the dumping of toxic household products in storm sewers. The river rats are part of a larger grassroots movement to reclaim this urban waterway, the Friends of the Buffalo River. This group has been so active and insistent, their river is now the site of major remediation efforts. Experiments with dredging techniques tackle the problem of contaminated sediments. To determine which toxic chemicals are entering the food chain, U.S. Fish and Wildlife researchers study Buffalo River fish.
All around the fish. Okay, there's another ulcer on the left side of the fish. The same chemicals that are causing health problems in these fish are associated with human health conditions. So these brown bullheads are serving as indicators for us of ecosystem health, and we're part of the ecosystem.
Even in the most basic ways, the Buffalo River and many other hotspots on the Great Lakes are being cared for by local people. Because of such community activism, one of the most contaminated regions in North America has reason for hope. There are no other Everglades in the world. They have always been, one of the unique regions of the earth, remote, never wholly known. The miracle of the light pours over the green and brown expanse of sawgrass and of water. Shining and slow-moving below, the grass and water that is the meaning and the central fact of the Everglades of Florida. It is a river of grass. So begins Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in her book about the wetlands paradise that was South Florida. When she wrote in 1947, Douglas could not have imagined how rapidly the ensuing decades would devour her beloved glades. Everglades National Park wildlife biologist John Ogden.
The Everglades that we have today really does look like the Everglades that we've always had. The vegetation is basically the same, but what's changed so dramatically is the animal life in the system. It's a system that looks like it always has looked, but doesn't act the way it is. And from my point of view, it's not the Everglades anymore. What we're seeing is what some people might describe as an ecosystem collapse.
90% of the wading birds that once nested here have disappeared in the last half-century. The Florida panther, snail kite, wood stork, and American crocodile are all species on a slippery path to extinction. Nathaniel Reed, a prominent Florida environmentalist, has been working on Everglades issues for 35 years.
We didn't really know at that time, 50 years ago, how important the Everglades are to all of South Florida. It's everything that we count on for clean water. It's everything we count on for wildlife. It's everything we count on for Florida Bay and the millions and millions of creatures that live within the Everglades region. This is it. This is the mainstream. This is the main well.
For more than a century, the main well has blocked empire builders in their quest for riches.
Water has basically been viewed as the enemy in South Florida, especially from the point of view of development and agriculture and so on. So much of what's been done in the system up until the last couple of decades has been designed to get rid of water, that water is evil and we've got to get it under control.
So the state of Florida and the Army Corps of Engineers built one of the most elaborate plumbing systems in history. The River of Grass was turned into a collection of sinks, faucets, and drain lines. One of the main beneficiaries was the powerful sugar industry. Citrus and produce farmers also moved into the Everglades, taking advantage of the rich, drained muck and long winter growing season. And then there is the suburban sprawl for which South Florida is justifiably famous. Subdivisions and strip malls march farther and farther into the glades, drinking up wetlands, eating up wildlife habitat. The River of Grass, once a 50-mile wide sheet of water gently flowing south from Lake Okeechobee, now looks like this. 2,000 square miles of wetlands have been lost, over half the original Everglades. Canals and levees create a system of compartments. Everglades National Park sits, besieged at the bottom end of the drainage, an aquatic park dying of thirst.
Everybody else got a dependable supply of water. The urban areas got a dependable supply of water. Agriculture got a dependable supply of water. Everybody got flood control, and the park got screwed.
The salvation of the park is all a matter of water. There are only 2 seasons in South Florida, wet and dry. An average of 45 inches falls from May through October. Then, very little rain for 6 months. As the great flooded marsh dries and forms pools, fishes, frogs, and crayfish are trapped and become easy prey for small mammals and wading birds. Birds like the endangered wood stork will not reproduce until these conditions occur. Today in the park, the great marshes are drying out too often, too extensively, undermining the food supply. The wetlands become weaker and increasingly unable to produce food when the next rainy season rolls around. Now, insufficient fresh water flows out of the Everglades into Florida Bay. Salinity levels are rising and ravaging plants and animals in this vast estuary. An ecosystem collapses like so many dominoes. A restoration plan has been drawn up for Everglades National Park. The slow work of changing policy to get water where it needs to be, when it needs to be there, is underway. Echoing the magnitude of the original plumbing system, this wetlands restoration program is the most ambitious ever attempted.
So we've got to start off by removing some of the levees. We're talking about taking out several miles of levees and canals along our boundaries. We're talking about changing the distribution and direction of water flows. The entire world is aware of the Everglades. They're watching the Everglades. More and more they know that we're trying to turn things around in the Everglades. And the general attitude is, we're watching to see if you can do it.
If we don't protect this one, what in the world will those people do in other lands and other places that have something like the Everglades do? There'll be no incentive. There'll be no example. There will be no sense of purpose or principle. That's what this is all about. It's principle and purpose, that we're not going to let a great natural area die.
Roger Funk is a farmer outside Garden City, Kansas. He raises grains and alfalfa on land that once was shortgrass prairie. Roger's success has come from hard work, good instincts, and plenty of underground water.
Oh, I love to irrigate. You know, as a farmer, you like to see things grow so well. And when you first start this irrigation in the spring, you know, it's a fantastic feeling. You know that you're going to raise something where you irrigate. I think maybe it spells success too. You know, if you irrigate, you get a crop every year. And if you don't irrigate, some years you don't. And I think maybe that's some of it, but it's just a good feeling when that water starts.
That water, the water that makes agriculture so stable in this area, comes from the Ogallala Aquifer. Resting beneath portions of 8 high plains states, the Ogallala Aquifer is North America's largest underground freshwater supply. In some places, the aquifer bubbles to the surface as springs, lakes, or rivers. Elsewhere, one must drill 300 feet to reach it. An aquifer, unlike a surface reservoir, is a kind of waterlogged sponge made of gravel and sand. This sponge holds a quadrillion gallons of water. Getting water to the surface was the problem. Windmills and hand pumps could support only a few head of cattle or keep a farmhouse supplied. Farmers depended on rainfall and were constantly bedeviled by drought. From the 1880s on, southwest Kansas saw most of its farm families starve out and move on just about every 20 years. All that changed when natural gas was developed here in the 50s. Now there was cheap power to pump the water out of the ground. Southwest Kansas became one of the most productive agricultural areas in the country. Cattle feedlots moved in, attracted by local grain production. With irrigation booming, farmers could raise higher value crops and make more money. Crossroads blossomed into towns. Towns matured into small cities. In less than 15 years, cheap, abundant water had dramatically changed both landscape and economy. But just as the party got going, the ice cream began to melt.
When my father-in-law bought this half section here in 1951, we were all so convinced that this water would last forever because everybody said it would. You know, it was just an underground river, and it was into the middle 60s before we actually realized that it's not an underground river, that it's geologic water. It was put here thousands of years ago, and when it's gone, it's going to be gone. We've actually dropped the water table 110, 120 foot in the 40 years that we've been farming here. It's a big drop. It scares you to death.
Hey, good morning. Good morning. What do you think?
I think it rained.
We're not going to bail, are we?
No, I don't think so.
You want to pick up that pipe? Yeah, Mother's here.
Roger farms with his 40-year-old son, Boyd Funk, who lives nearby with his wife and 2 young sons.
Well, I'll see if Mother will drive for us and we'll pick up that pipe.
Okay.
Okay.
Attitudes about water have been slow to change atop the Ogallala. Farmers are, after all, businessmen.
We understand money, we don't understand conservation very well. But, you know, as long as we can make a nickel at it, we're going to do it. You know, we're not going to do it just to be nice, just for environmental things, you know. But as soon as it won't pay, then we'll quit.
In southwest Kansas, the Ogallala's water is being used up 25 times faster than it's being replenished. Until recently, pumping regulations were unenforced.
Well, this is a water meter. It records the water that you use. It actually records it in gallons per minute, and this well will run about 900 gallons per minute. We're required to put them in now. People are realizing that the water is, you know, a dwindling resource, and lots of wells have gone dry. You know, I mean, probably hundreds of wells have dried up in Finney County, in the northern part of the county. And those people, they know, you know, once you lose your well, once your well's dried up, well, then you say, hey, we ought to have some control.
When the water level drops and if gas price goes up, it just makes water so much more valuable, more expensive to pump. And we're going to either quit pumping and go back to dry land, or else we're going to find crops with more value, maybe vegetable crops or crops that can be raised economically with more expensive water. Our answer has been to shut the wells down and to go dry land. And that's a difficult choice.
Dry land farming is much riskier than irrigating, and yields are much lower. So a dry land farmer needs 4 times as much land as an irrigator to make the same income. Though the Funks still irrigate a number of fields, they have been expanding their dry land operations since the late 70s. The decision to invest in land rather than water was a tough one, not the first tough one Roger has faced. A decade earlier, many farmers were swept up by the latest breakthrough in irrigation, the center pivot sprinkler. Making great green pancakes on the landscape, center pivots transform this and many other parts of the plains. Though they use less water than flood irrigation, center pivots, ironically, have hastened the depletion of the Ogallala aquifer. Flood irrigation requires fields to be level so the water can soak into the soil. But center pivot sprinklers can move over hillier ground, so hundreds of thousands of previously unfarmed acres were suddenly put into production. Many more straws were stuck into the same glass, and the water level plummeted.
We know the Ogallala is a depleting resource, without question. And also the natural gas is a depleting resource. I mean, those are the 2 things that have kept agriculture going the way it is now. I'm hoping that agriculture technology will change quick enough that we'll be able to continue with profitable agriculture without the water. That's my hope, and I kind of think maybe we will, because there's tremendous strides going on in agriculture now.
What are the ways that we can enhance and expand the agriculture economy of this region in face of the situation overall with the Ogallala aquifer?
The Kansas Secretary of Agriculture announces a brand new study on the Ogallala and explains its goals.
What else can we look at? Are there other systems? Are there other ways that we can get more out of every drop of water? Here is the key to what has happened in our agriculture is cattle, and it's over the Ogallala, and the growth potential is enormous in this area to feed more livestock.
Basically, this is a cropping system study.
Farmers attending the annual field day at the local Research Extension Center are concerned about their future, eager to learn how to make the most of what's left of the groundwater, but wondering where they go from here.
I'd hope my son Boyd and the grandsons would be able to stay in agriculture. But I even tell Boyd that, I can see that we're going to be irrigating maybe as long as I'm alive, but I wouldn't guarantee that he's going to be irrigating as long as he's alive. In fact, I question that he will still be irrigating before he's through farming. I really question it.
You guys get to coast when we come to a hill.
Is everybody ready to eat? Anything left? Boy, it all looks so good. Yes, there is.
Worst case scenario, I mean, if without irrigation, you wouldn't have the beef industry here and you wouldn't have the packing plants. I mean, worst case scenario, I guess I'm optimistic enough to think it's not going to be that bad. As the water table drops, agriculture's not going to have the influence that it's had before.
Ready to go?
But we're so dependent on the water at this point that without some new technology, there's going to be some agonizing changes.
Oh, the Lord's been good to me, and so I thank the Lord for giving me the things I need, the sun and the rain and the apple seed. The Lord's been good to me. Amen.
Just in building this place, you've used up a lot of that precious resource. They'd have a huge prayer for rain down here. They have to gather together to make sure that the rain got all the way from the clouds to the mesa top. Because too often around here, that doesn't happen. I want you to imagine a 24-year drought for me, because that happened here. Right at the end of the 13th century, year after year, for 24 years, they didn't get enough water. And right around the same time, people started to leave. By 1300, there's no one left up here.
In the arid West, water has always controlled population. Where people lived, how many could live there, when it was time to move on. That has changed. Now Oz-like cities shimmer in the desert heat. The desert is no place to raise crops. Even when it does rain, the fickle skies quickly reclaim what they have just bestowed. Now, crops are grown in the desert. California alone produces more vegetables than anywhere else in the country. The parched West is a vast and profitable garden. Since the turn of the century, moving water from where it was to where it wasn't has been a Western obsession. Where it was the Colorado River. With its tributaries, the Colorado is the only significant surface water in the Southwest. But the same power that carved a majestic path through the land also made the river unusable by man. That is, until Hoover Dam showed the way to conquest. Now, countless reservoirs and diversion projects dispense the Colorado River to 7 states. The water is divided evenly between the upper basin and the lower basin, with a smaller share going to Mexico. Of the states, California gets the most water, Nevada the least. There is none left over. The Colorado River no longer reaches the Gulf of California. It disappears into the desert sands of Mexico, many miles short of its goal. Upstream, there's a battle going on. More people want what there's less and less of. Water wars are raging in the West. Las Vegas is square in the middle of one. Some liken it to the Los Angeles water grab of nearly a century ago. 4,000 people a month are moving to Las Vegas. 4,000 thirsty people moving to a place that gets only 4 inches of rain a year. The Las Vegas Valley Water District is headed by Pat Mulroy.
We've run out. Nevada, because Southern Nevada has grown so much and the city has really taken off, it's used up its 300,000 acre-feet of Colorado River water, and it'll be fully developed and used by the year 2006. And then the question becomes, where do we take water from? And there are really 2 arenas that we can look toward to get additional water, either from the Colorado River or from within the state of Nevada. We have to take it from another area.
While Las Vegas goes head-to-head with Arizona and California over Colorado River water, the city is covering its bases. Las Vegas has filed claims on pockets of underground water far to the north. This water, much of it under harsh, uninhabited desert, bubbles to the surface in several small farming communities. The proposed plan would pump the groundwater and send it south through hundreds of miles of pipelines. Rural residents are not pleased. They claim the scheme would dry up their springs, turn their green valleys to dust. Environmentalists agree, claiming fragile desert plants and animals would perish. Farmers, ranchers, and their strange new bedfellows, environmentalists, have organized to fight Las Vegas. It's an emotional battle, as fights over water tend to be.
185, 185, 90, 90, 190, 190, 195, 195, 195, 195, 195, and now 200. Gordon, you're out. Now 200, 200. It's your water too. $200. We'll leave it at $200 and a two.
We're not asking them to give up anything, but they're asking us to give up everything, our life and our future, and everything we stand for.
220, 220.
The people with all of the power and the money want more power and want more money. And in this state, water is power.
I don't see that they have to have all that rapid growth.
And that's what really upsets rural Nevada is when we go to Las Vegas and see it running down the streets, being wasted. They're trying to tell us they're conserving water, and you see it running down the streets, or they're watering lawns 24 hours a day. You fly in with the airplane, it's all golf courses and lakes, swimming pools, waste of water.
A great filly. Here we go. $200. We'll leave it between the two. I get $200 and a 25. 220. She's papered. Right. 200. Now 25.
Some older residents are disturbed by the parallels to the Los Angeles water wars. They know only too well how that struggle turned out.
Yes, it's important. But will it do any good? Because the people in Owens Valley fought too. They fought. They spent their money. A lot of them went broke of fighting it. And then when it came, they took it to the federal government. And the President of the United States said, let the water go where the most people are. Well, if they take it where the most people are, there are more people in Vegas than there are up through here.
And the population keeps on growing. In the 80s, Vegas was one of the fastest growing cities in the West. Its per capita water use is among the very highest in the country. Upscale housing developments are built around man-made lakes which lose thousands of gallons a day to evaporation. Inadvertent lakes are formed from the runoff of overwatered lawns. Misters spray endlessly, waiting for a hamburger customer to keep cool. On the Strip, the Mirage Resort's watery spectacle seems to fly in the face of the crisis. Resort tycoon Steve Wynn says his fountains use treated water from a contaminated shallow aquifer. The Mirage is the thing, says Steve.
The perception that this is a lush, verdant, tropical, water-rich paradise is the key to this resort's attractiveness. Not only this resort, but many of the others. What we've got to learn how to do is to preserve that perception and find original and creative ways of resolving the dilemma of inappropriate water usage with the business that we're in. It's not easy, but it's possible. We were successful here. We use less water per room than any other hotel in the world because of the valves on all the showers, because of the special toilet plumbing we have. We don't use regular water for irrigating our grass and our trees and our plants or our water features. Now, we do have 3,000 rooms, so in absolute usage of water, we're talking about a lot of water.
I'm never going to apologize for the Mirage Hotel. It employs more people in Nevada than all of agriculture and uses an absolute infinitesimal amount of water in comparison. 90% of our water is used in this state is used for agriculture, and that doesn't employ as many people as the Mirage Hotel does. Now, those numbers don't jive.
A similar imbalance in water allocation exists all over the West. 80 to 90% goes to farms, most in California. These big corporate farms have long controlled the fate of Western water. Now there's a shakeup. New voices are starting to demand a bigger share. Sunbelt cities swelling with population have organized. They're challenging giant water subsidies and unfair pricing, going after the holy grail of agribusiness. The cities are not the only ones jumping into the fray. Environmental and recreational voices grow ever louder and more insistent. As urban areas grow, residents want healthy, natural areas for their leisure time. They want water for play and sport, wild and scenic areas to stay that way. They want rivers like the Colorado to be managed with their needs in mind, not just for irrigators and power generation. Indians have also emerged with new power in the Western water wars. Citing a 1908 Supreme Court doctrine, reservations like the Ak-Chin in Arizona have successfully sued the federal government for water rights. Thirsty desert cities are suddenly courting Native Americans for leases on their secure Colorado River water. Many desert cities are being forced to make do with less. There's no question this is the future. Tucson is one of the most progressive cities in the West when it comes to water conservation. They've even got a water cop who patrols the streets looking for water waste. Fully half the violations he investigates come from anonymous phone tips on the Wasting Water hotline. Conservation training begins at an early age in Tucson's school system.
If people keep wasting water, we could have a real problem. What would happen if everybody wasted and let it run and run and run? Oh, what would happen? Why, the water would just disappear. Then we'd be in trouble, especially here in the desert. So, if we take care of our water and save it, then it will be there when we need it. Can we count on you guys to do that? Yeah!
As the arid West struggles to invent a new version of itself, one with a more realistic view of its most precious resource, our relationship to fresh water is being re-examined all over the country. The luxury of taking water for granted is a part of our youth. We are no longer young. Much damage has been done to our lakes, our rivers, our wetlands. We have seriously depleted our non-renewable water supplies. This is not something happening to someone else. It is happening to us. All the water that will ever be is right now. Now is the time to rush to its defense.